Valeria Romero celebrated her 28th birthday at a restaurant in Polanco with neon lights and live music. That night, amid golden balloons and a cake decorated with sugar flowers, her husband Rodrigo Salinas took her hand in front of the camera and whispered something in her ear that she later repeated to her followers. He told me, "I'm his everything." The video reached 340,000 views in less than 48 hours. Valeria was from Iztapalapa, one of Mexico City's most populous and complex neighborhoods. She had grown up in a neighborhood of peeling walls and laundry hanging between windows, the only child of Carmen Reyes, a seamstress by trade, and a woman of unyielding will. From a young age, Valeria learned that beauty could be a tool, and she used it wisely. At 19, she began posting makeup videos on her social media. By 24, she had 180,000 followers on TikTok and active collaborations with Mexican cosmetics brands. Her content revolved around 3 pillars: accessible beauty for women in the neighborhood, practical spirituality based on gratitude and manifestation, and everyday family life. That third pillar was the one that generated the most engagement. Viewers consumed her morning videos, the couple's challenges with Rodrigo, Sunday barbecues with her 6-year-old daughter Sophia, and the seemingly tender dynamic between a hard-working woman and a man who appeared to adore her effortlessly. Rodrigo Salinas was 32 years old and worked as a supervisor at a grocery distributor in Ecatepec. He wasn't an influencer, nor did he aspire to be one, but he appeared in Valeria's videos with the ease of someone who knows he is loved. On screen, he laughed easily, hugged her without her having to ask, and uttered phrases that commenters repeated ad nauseum. "This is how you love. This is how you respect," users wrote beneath her clips. Without meaning to, Rodrigo had become the imaginary standard of the ideal man for thousands of women who knew him only through a screen. What those women didn't see was what lay outside the frame. Carmen visited her daughter almost every Thursday. She knew the apartment in Naucalpan, where the couple lived with Sophia, well. A second-floor unit with low ceilings, a small living room, and a kitchen that smelled of fried chili peppers from the afternoon onward. Carmen noticed things. She noticed when Valeria took too long to open the door. She noticed when Rodrigo answered for her in conversation, interrupting her gently but consistently. She noticed the way her daughter lowered her voice when talking about money, or how she looked away when asked how things were between them. "Fine, Mom. Everything's fine," was always the answer. On social media, Valeria posted quotes about the power of healing as a couple, about love built with patience, and about the importance of not giving up. Her followers interpreted them as a philosophy of life. Carmen read them as coded messages from someone trying to convince herself. The couple had gone through at least 2 deep crises in 5 years of marriage. In one of them, Valeria had come to her mother's house with Sophia and a small suitcase, staying for 3 weeks. She didn't say much about what had happened. She just said she needed space to think. Rodrigo called her every day. In the end, she came back. Together they recorded a video titled, "Real Couples Also Fall and Get Back Up," which became one of the most shared on her profile. No one in the public knew that video was recorded 4 days after Valeria had seriously considered not returning. On the morning of March 14th, a Wednesday with cloudy skies and slow traffic on the ring road, Valeria spoke on the phone with her mother for 16 minutes. They had plans to meet up over the weekend to take Sophia to Chapultepec Park. Valeria sounded calm. She told her she had posted a new video that morning, one about self-care routines, and that it was already getting good comments. Before hanging up, she said, "I love you, Mom. See you on Saturday." That was the last time Carmen heard her daughter's voice. 3 weeks before that phone call, Valeria had pulled a blue folder from the back of her underwear drawer and handed it to her mother in silence. Inside were copies of bank statements, 2 screenshots of WhatsApp conversations, and a handwritten sheet with dates and amounts. Carmen looked at it, not quite understanding. Valeria sat across from her at the kitchen table, poured herself coffee without sugar, and spoke for nearly an hour without interruption. Rodrigo had been transferring money from their joint account to an account Valeria didn't know about for months. It wasn't a huge amount all at once, but small, constant withdrawals, the kind that go unnoticed unless you check the statement carefully. Valeria had discovered it by accident while looking for a payment receipt for the apartment. The total accumulated over 8 months exceeded 47,000 pesos. When she asked Rodrigo about it, he said it was for a surprise. When she pressed him, he changed his story. It was to pay off a debt to a cousin. When she asked for proof, he got upset, very upset. It wasn't just the money, it was the pattern behind the money. Valeria had started documenting things a long time ago. The last-minute cancellations, when she had work commitments. The little comments about her clothes, about how she spoke on camera, about how much time she spent replying to messages from her followers. "It seems like your fans matter more to you than your family," he'd say, with a smile that wasn't a smile. When she landed a new collaboration, he'd congratulate her in public and downplay it in private. "It's not that big of a deal," was a phrase Valeria had learned to anticipate. What weighed on her most wasn't the control. It was the specific loneliness of living with someone who knew exactly how to make you doubt yourself. Carmen listened to everything. She put the folder in her bag and asked her daughter what she wanted to do. Valeria said she had already made a decision. She had contacted a family lawyer recommended by a friend from her neighborhood. She had an appointment for the following week. This time, she said, she wasn't going to back down. The process was quiet and deliberate. Valeria gathered documents, separated her personal savings from the joint account, and spoke with her lawyer twice via video call from the bathroom with the faucet running so Rodrigo wouldn't hear. She was worried about Sofia. She was worried about the apartment, which was in both their names. She was worried about what he would do when he found out officially, because she already suspected that he suspected something. On February 28th, Valeria signed the divorce petition. That night, she posted a video about gratitude. She appeared sitting in front of her window with a lit candle, talking about cycles that end and those that begin. Her followers filled the comments with hearts. No one read between the lines. No one had any reason to. What followed was a tension that Valeria described to her mother as living in a house that breathes differently. Rodrigo didn't confront the divorce head-on. He didn't yell. He didn't throw things. He did something more effective. He became unpredictable. Some days he'd come home from work with food for the three of them and put on music in the kitchen as if nothing had changed. Other days he'd spend hours in silence, staring at his phone, answering in monosyllables. One night, Valeria heard him moving things around in the bedroom while she was putting Sofia to bed. When she went in, he was arranging something inside the dark wooden trunk they kept at the foot of the bed, an antique piece of furniture they'd bought together at a flea market in Tepito during their first year of marriage. She asked him what he was doing. He said he was looking for some blankets. She didn't ask any more questions. Carmen noticed that during those weeks, Valeria was posting less. The videos kept appearing regularly. Because she had commitments with brands and couldn't just disappear from the screen. But Carmen saw something different in her eyes. A kind of weariness that the camera filter couldn't quite hide. She asked her one afternoon if she was afraid. Valeria took a while to answer. "It's not exactly fear, Mom. It's just that I know him. And when I know him like this, I don't know what might happen." Carmen asked her to leave with her that very week, to take Sofia and leave the apartment behind. Valeria said she couldn't, that if she left before the legal proceedings moved forward, she could lose her rights to the property, that her lawyer had told her to stand firm, that everything was going to be okay. That was on March 10th. 4 days later, Carmen received a call that changed everything. The call came in at 2:47 p.m. Carmen was in her studio, bent over a beige linen fabric she had to deliver the next day. When she saw Rodrigo's name on the screen, she felt something she couldn't name at the time, but would later recognize as a premonition. He spoke quickly and with a tense voice, telling her that Valeria had been in an accident, that the ambulance was already on its way, and that she should go to Naucalpan General Hospital as soon as possible. Carmen asked what kind of accident. Rodrigo said he didn't know exactly, that he had come home and found her like that. He hung up before she could ask anything else. Carmen arrived at the hospital 40 minutes later, her heart pounding in her chest and her hands cold. Rodrigo was in the waiting room, sitting with his elbows on his knees and his gaze fixed on the floor. When he saw her enter, he stood up and hugged her. It was a hug that Carmen felt was fake from the very first second, not because it was cold, but because it was excessive, like someone hugging to hide their face. The doctors informed her that Valeria had been admitted without stable vital signs. Her face had visible marks. Her neck was bruised. Her ankles showed signs of pressure. She was hooked up to machines that were breathing for her. Carmen demanded an explanation. Rodrigo repeated his story. He had come home from work, the bedroom door was locked. He knocked several times, and when he got no answer, he opened it. He found Valeria on the floor, next to the wooden trunk they kept at the foot of the bed. The lid was open. He said he assumed she had fallen, that perhaps she had slipped while trying to take something out of it. He called emergency services immediately. That was his account. And the police, at first, accepted it without much resistance. What the initial investigation documented was brief and rushed. A 28-year-old woman found unconscious at her home with no direct witnesses, and a medical history with no record of serious illnesses. The officer who filed the report wrote, "Possible accidental fall" in the remarks section. No one accurately measured the height of the trunk. No one photographed the exact position of the body before the ambulance arrived. No one asked Rodrigo why the bedroom door was locked from the inside if he claimed Valeria was alone. Sophia, the 6-year-old daughter, had been picked up that morning by Rodrigo's sister to spend the day at her house. That detail wasn't investigated either. For 4 days, Valeria remained in intensive care without regaining consciousness. Carmen did not leave the hospital. She slept in chairs, ate whatever they brought her, and spoke to her daughter as if she could hear her, telling her about the neighborhood, reminding her that Sophia was waiting for her, asking her to stay. Rodrigo showed up on the first day for 2 hours and on the second for less than an hour. On the third day, he did not come. On March 18th, Valeria Romero was pronounced dead. Official cause of death recorded by the medical examiner: severe respiratory failure, secondary to traumatic brain injury. The State of Mexico's Attorney General's office reviewed the case in less than a week and issued its ruling. There was insufficient evidence to presume a crime had been committed. The case was closed. Carmen received the news while sitting on the same bench in the waiting room where she had spent 4 days. The official who delivered the news did so in the neutral, administrative tone of someone handing out lab results. He gave her a case number in case she wanted to review the file later. Then he left. Carmen sat alone with that piece of paper in her hand for a long time. What none of the officials explained to her, and what she would discover weeks later while reading the coroner's report with a magnifying glass and the help of a neighbor who had studied nursing, was that the bruises on Valeria's neck had a particular shape. They weren't the kind of marks left by a fall against a straight edge. They were symmetrical, bilateral, the kind produced by sustained pressure from 2 hands. The dark wooden trunk, the same one they had bought together at the Tepito flea market during their first year of marriage, contained, according to the police report, only blankets and seasonal clothing. Carmen read it 3 times. Then she remembered something Valeria had told her offhand one February night, almost in passing, while they were talking on the phone. "Rodrigo's acting weird, Mom. Yesterday I found him measuring the trunk with a tailor's tape measure. I asked him what for, and he said he wanted to know if more things would fit." At the time, neither of them had given that image much thought. Now Carmen couldn't stop thinking about it. Carmen Reyes wasn't a lawyer. She wasn't a journalist. She had never set foot in a university, nor did she have contacts in the district attorney's offices, nor did she know how the justice system worked from the inside. What she did have was a blue folder her daughter had given her 3 weeks before she died, a precise memory, and an absolute determination not to rest. The first thing she did was call the lawyer with whom Valeria had initiated the divorce proceedings. Attorney Fuentes confirmed what Carmen had already suspected. The divorce filing existed, it was signed, and it was dated. That meant Rodrigo officially knew, through legal channels, that their marriage was ending. The lawyer also told her something else. 2 days before Valeria's death, Rodrigo had called her office, asking if there was any way to stop the process. They told him no. Carmen wrote everything down in a black-covered notebook she bought at the stationery store in her neighborhood. Date, time, name of the person who informed her, exact details. She filled the first few pages in less than a week. The second thing she did was request the complete case file from the State of Mexico Attorney General's office. The process took 12 days. When the document arrived, Carmen had it printed at the copy shop on the corner and read it while sitting in her workshop with a yellow highlighter and the help of her neighbor Esperanza, who had studied nursing for 2 years before getting married and knew how to read a forensic report with a basic understanding. Together, they identified 4 inconsistencies that the case closure had failed to explain. The first, the bilateral bruises on the neck, which the coroner had recorded without specifying their origin. The second, a laceration on the inside of Valeria's lower lip, consistent with a direct blow, which was not mentioned in the initial police report. The third, the emergency report indicated that the bedroom door was locked at the time Rodrigo claimed to have opened it, but the apartment's lock model could not be locked from the outside. The fourth, and the one that disturbed Carmen the most. The crime scene inventory contained no photographic record of the trunk's interior before it was searched. Carmen photographed every page of the file with her cell phone. Then she searched online to find out how to file a formal complaint with the State of Mexico Human Rights Commission regarding negligence in the investigation of a violent death. The process was long and bureaucratic, but it existed. She started it on her own, filling out the forms on her phone's small screen, making mistakes and starting over until it was submitted. Meanwhile, she began to speak out, not in a sensational or chaotic way. Carmen carefully chose whom she told and how much. She spoke to the sister of a friend who worked as a reporter for a news website in the state of Mexico. She spoke to a woman who ran a feminist collective in Naucalpan that documented cases of domestic violence with questionable resolutions. She spoke to the pastor of her church, who knew several families in the neighborhood with influence in various sectors. She built a small but functional network, thread by thread, with the patience of someone who has sewn clothes all her life. On social media, the story began to circulate in fragments. Some of Valeria's followers, seeing no activity on her account for weeks, began to ask what had happened. Someone posted a story on Instagram mentioning her name and the word justice. Others shared it. Carmen didn't control that flow, but she didn't stop it either. Rodrigo, throughout that time, kept a low profile. He had temporarily moved in with his mother in Ecatepec. He posted a single story on his Facebook profile, a photo of Valeria with a black heart and the caption, "Always in my memory." Comments were disabled after 2 days. What Carmen discovered in the 6th week of her personal investigation came via an unexpected call. A woman who did not want to give her full name, she only said her name was Marcela, contacted Carmen through the Instagram profile she had created to document the case. Marcela claimed to have been Rodrigo's co-worker at the distribution center in Ecatepec. She told her that approximately 10 days before Valeria's death, Rodrigo had arrived at the warehouse with the trunk of his truck loaded. A co-worker jokingly asked him if he was moving. Rodrigo said no, that he was just reorganizing things at home. That same week, he had borrowed a tape measure from the inventory manager. He said he needed to measure a piece of furniture. Carmen read that message 4 times. Then she opened her black notebook and wrote in capital letters, underlined twice, the tape measure. It was the second time someone had mentioned Rodrigo measuring the trunk. The first had been her own daughter, in a late-night call in February that Carmen had let pass without giving it much thought. Now that image returned with a completely different weight. That night, Carmen didn't sleep. She stayed up until 4 in the morning reviewing the file again, looking for the exact measurements of the trunk listed in the report. She found them on page 31, noted almost in passing among other items in the room. 1. 68 meters long, 58 centimeters wide, 62 centimeters deep. Valeria was 1, 64 meters tall. Carmen showed up at the offices of the State of Mexico's Attorney General's office one Tuesday morning with her black-covered notebook, a folder containing copies organized by date, and a list of 7 handwritten questions she had no intention of leaving without answers. She was received by an agent named Flores, a young man with the expression of someone manning a service counter. He explained to her kindly but firmly that the case was closed, that the ruling had been signed by the assigned public prosecutor, and that substantial new evidence was required to challenge it. Carmen asked him what he considered substantial evidence. The agent cleared his throat and mentioned eyewitnesses or physical evidence not considered in the original investigation. Carmen placed the photographs from the file on the desk, with the inconsistencies marked in yellow. The agent looked at them without touching them. He told her that this was already part of the existing file and that her personal interpretation did not constitute new evidence. Carmen asked him if a second person who could corroborate the suspect's behavior in the days leading up to the death counted as a witness. The agent said it depended on the context. Carmen left the prosecutor's office without formal answers, but with something more valuable. She had managed to get Agent Flores to write down her name and number in an internal log. There was now a document stating that she had been there, that she had asked questions, that she had not accepted the case being quietly closed. In Mexico, that kind of bureaucratic trail can be the difference between a case that gets buried and one that someone eventually reviews. The complaint filed with the Human Rights Commission moved faster than Carmen had expected, partly thanks to the feminist collective in Naucalpan, which submitted an amicus brief highlighting the case as part of a regional pattern of inadequate investigations into women's deaths classified as accidental. The brief cited 8 previous cases in the state of Mexico with similar characteristics: women in the process of separating, deaths occurring in the marital home, quick closures without any charges filed. The press did not cover it immediately, but the document was incorporated into the human rights file, and that forced the prosecutor's office to respond formally within 30 days. Meanwhile, Marcela, Rodrigo's former co-worker, agreed to expand on her testimony. This time she did so in writing, in a long message that Carmen printed out and kept in her folder. Marcela remembered precisely the week Rodrigo had arrived at the warehouse looking different. Not absent or sad, but tense in a specific way, like someone solving a logistical problem. He had asked one of the drivers if the delivery vans could carry large pieces of furniture without any problem. The driver told him yes, that with the racks extended, almost anything would fit. Rodrigo nodded and asked no further questions. That had been 9 days before Valeria died. Carmen also received an unexpected message on social media. A woman named Dolores, who lived in the same building where Valeria and Rodrigo rented their apartment, sent her a direct message. Dolores lived on the first floor, directly below them. She told her that on the afternoon of March 14th, around 1 o'clock, she had heard loud noises coming from the apartment above. It wasn't the first time she'd heard something, but that afternoon was different. There was a sharp thud, then silence, then the sound of something being dragged across the wooden floor. After that, nothing. She thought about calling but didn't. She was embarrassed to get involved in other people's problems. That embarrassment had haunted her ever since, keeping her from sleeping well. Carmen asked her to repeat all of that in front of a witness. Dolores agreed. With that testimony, Carmen returned to Attorney Fuentes, and together they drafted a formal request to reopen the case, attaching Dolores's testimony, Marcela's written statement, the analysis of the forensic inconsistencies, and the trunk's measurements compared to Valeria's height. It was a case file, pieced together bit by a seamstress from Iztapalapa who hadn't slept more than 5 hours straight in 2 months. The request was filed on a Wednesday. By Friday of that same week, the district attorney's office acknowledged receipt. But it was another discovery that ultimately shattered the official version. As part of the reopening process, Attorney Fuentes requested a technical analysis of the fingerprints collected at the scene. The original file stated that samples had been taken from the lid and the interior of the trunk, but the comparative analysis had never been completed. When they were finally processed, the result was unequivocal. On the inside lid of the trunk, on the edge, where the wood has a groove for closing it from the inside, there were no fingerprints belonging to Valeria. The only identifiable fingerprints on that surface belonged to Rodrigo Salinas. A person who accidentally falls into a trunk cannot close the lid from the outside. Carmen read the analysis results while sitting in the armchair where Valeria used to sit when she visited. She held the paper in her hands and wasn't crying. She hadn't cried in weeks, not because the pain had lessened, but because she had learned to transform it into something else, into movement, into questions, into pages filled with tight handwriting inside a black-covered notebook. Sophia was with her that afternoon. She was playing on the floor with some plastic dolls, making up a story in a low voice that only she understood. Carmen watched her for a moment. The girl had her mother's eyes, that particular way of squinting them when she was concentrating. "Grandma," said Sophia without looking up, "when is my mom coming back?" Carmen folded the paper carefully, put it away in the folder, and replied with the only truth she could give her for now. "Not yet, my love. But we're looking for her." The formal reopening of the case was announced on a Monday morning. Carmen found out through a call from Attorney Fuentes while she was hanging laundry in the backyard of her house. There was no celebration, just a long silence, followed by a deep breath, the kind you've been holding in for a long time. The state of Mexico's Attorney General's office assigned 2 new investigators. This time, the process was different. They summoned Rodrigo Salinas to testify as a witness, a legal status that in practice meant they could question him even though no formal charges had yet been filed. Rodrigo showed up with a private attorney. He repeated his account using the same structure he had used from the beginning. He came home from work, the door was locked, he found her on the floor. He called emergency services. When the agents showed him the results of the fingerprint analysis on the inside lid of the trunk, Rodrigo remained silent for 40 seconds. His lawyer asked for a recess. There was no second session of voluntary testimony. Carmen knew the system could be slow and that evidence alone wasn't always enough to move an institutional machine that had preferred an easy closure. She decided then to do what her daughter had taught her without meaning to: use the screen. She created a short video on her cell phone, sitting in the same armchair as always, with the folder on her lap and a photo of Valeria leaning against the wall behind her. She spoke for 4 minutes without a script. She said who her daughter was. She said how she had died. She said what the fingerprints indicated. She said that the man who had killed her was free. She posted it on the account she had created for the case and went to sleep without knowing what would happen. When she woke up, the video had 180,000 views. Within 48 hours, it reached 1 million. Journalists from national media outlets began writing to her. The feminist collective in Naucalpan organized a rally in front of the district attorney's office. Local female legislators mentioned the case on the floor of the legislature. Valeria Romero's name circulated for the first time outside the state of Mexico, reaching Jalisco, Monterrey, and Oaxaca, spoken by women who had never met her, but who recognized in her story something that belonged to them as well. Rodrigo Salinas was arrested on a Thursday afternoon at his mother's home in Ecatepec. Carmen received the news by phone from attorney Fuentes, who this time did indeed shout with relief on the other end of the line. Rodrigo was brought before the supervising judge on charges of femicide, tampering with the crime scene, and making a false statement to authorities. The initial hearing was held 3 days later. Rodrigo did not speak during the reading of the charges. He kept his eyes downcast and his arms crossed over his chest, in the same closed-off posture that Carmen had learned to read as the signature of his lie. Before the judge, with the evidence laid out and the testimonies presented, Rodrigo Salinas finally confessed. He had begun arguing with Valeria that morning over the divorce. The conversation escalated. He lost control. He strangled her inside the room while his 6-year-old daughter was at his sister's house. Afterward, with a coldness that the judge described in his notes as clear premeditation, he placed the body inside the trunk, staged the scene, and waited a while before calling emergency services, making sure that Sofia would be the one to find her mother. That was what broke Carmen the most when she read it in the transcript. Not the confession itself, but that detail. That Rodrigo had calculated that the girl would be the one to open the door. Sofia was 6 years old and weighed less than 25 kilos, and her father had used that innocence as part of his alibi. Rodrigo Salinas was indicted and remanded in custody. Carmen left the courthouse holding Sofia's hand because the girl had insisted on accompanying her, and Carmen hadn't had the heart to say no. Outside, there were women holding signs. Some were crying, others were clapping. One approached Carmen and whispered something to her that she didn't repeat publicly, but wrote that night on the last page of her black-covered notebook. "Your daughter chose you well." Carmen closed the notebook. She looked at Sofia, who was watching the women with wide eyes and the serious expression of someone who understands more than she can put into words. The fight wasn't over. The legal process was just beginning. Carmen already knew she would demand that the charges reflect the full extent of what had happened, that there be no reductions, that the case file be complete and public, that Valeria's name not be reduced to a file number tucked away in a drawer. But that afternoon, for the first time in months, Carmen Reyes allowed herself to sit on a street bench without opening the folder, without reviewing the notebook, without doing anything other than holding her granddaughter's small hand and gazing at the sky over Norrköping until it grew dark.